Welcome to Watch Cozy. Before we start this episode, please subscribe to our channel.
We work really hard to find documents and put together this podcast for you.
Okay, let's get into it. When we think about ancient Iran, usually the big names pop up, right?
Yeah.
Like the Achaemenids.
The famous Persian Empire, yeah, Cyrus the Great and all that. That's the common picture.
Exactly. But what if I told you there's this whole other layer, a really rich history of civilizations flourishing there way, way before them?
That's precisely what we're digging into today. We're heading back maybe, 7,000 years or so, to what you could almost call Hour Zero for Iran.
Hour Zero. I like that.
Before those Aryan migrants, the Indo-Europeans who came later, this whole area,
Yeah.
the Iranian Plateau, it was just buzzing. A patchwork of different peoples, advanced cultures, city-states.
So not just one monolithic block.
Not at all. Some were incredibly sophisticated, high-tech for the time, lots of knowledge. Others were, more basic, maybe nomadic groups, a real mix.
So our mission today is kind of uncovering these firsts, these forgotten peoples, the ones who really laid the foundation.
Exactly. The indigenous groups, the ancient cultures that set the stage for everything that followed.
And honestly, get ready for some facts that might just, make you rethink things a bit.
Definitely some surprises in store.
Okay, so where do we start? This sounds fascinating already. Let's dive into one of these early players.
Right. Let's start with a big one, the Elamites. These guys weren't just ancient for the Iranian Plateau. They were major players on the world stage, really high up in terms of civilization and progress back then.
The Elamites. Okay. Important and advanced, you said. Where were they exactly?
They were mainly in southwest Iran. Think modern Fars, Lorestan, Bakhtiari, Bushehr, Khuzestan, that whole region. And they were around from, about 3,500 BCE, so really ancient.
That's 3,500 BCE.
Wow, and what's interesting is the name Elamites. That actually came from their neighbors in Mesopotamia, like the Akkadians and Sumerians. It basically meant people from the highlands.
Ah, so not what they call themselves.
Nope, they called themselves Haltamti.
Haltamti. Okay. And they built Susa. I've heard of Susa. That was a huge deal, wasn't it?
Absolutely huge. Susa was one of the golden cities of Western Asia, strategically vital, a center for trade, culture. It bridged the highlands and the Mesopotamian plains.
And I heard something. Something really surprising about them and the later Achaemenids. Something about writing.
Yes, that's a key point. It was the Elamites, the Haltamti, who actually taught the Achaemenid Empire their administrative writing system.
Get out.
Yeah.
Really, the Achaemenids learned writing from them.
That's right. It fundamentally changes that narrative of the Achaemenids just appearing out of nowhere, It shows this incredible continuity, how they absorbed so much from these earlier sophisticated cultures.
That is fascinating. It points to a much deeper connection than you usually hear about.
Precisely. And the Elamites, they were powerful. They fought numerous wars with the Mesopotamians, Babylonians, Assyrians, Sumerians. Lots of back and forth, victories and defeats.
So they were major rivals.
Big-time rivals. Eventually, though, they were conquered by Ashurbanipal, the Assyrian king, around, 538 BCE. But they weren't just wiped out.
How so?
While critically, the first official language of the Achaemenid Empire wasn't Old Persian, it was Elamite.
The first official language. Wow.
Their art, their culture, their religion, it all deeply influenced the later civilizations on the plateau. Their legacy was baked right in. You can see it in the surviving sculptures and reliefs. Really amazing detail.
Okay, wow. So the Elamites are a huge piece of this puzzle.
Yeah.
Let's shift gears a bit. Who else was significant in this pre-Aryan landscape?
All right, let's talk about the Kassites, another really interesting group.
Kassites.
Okay.
Now, I know you said don't confuse them with modern Kashanis or the Tiles.
Right, exactly. Though some researchers do see linguistic links in place names like Qazvin or Kashan, maybe even the Caspian Sea, but it's debated.
Okay, so who were these Kassites or Kashu or Kasi?
They lived more towards the Zagros Mountains areas like Lorestan, Kurdistan, parts of modern Elam province. They were known for being really skilled artists and craftsmen. We have a lot of beautiful artifacts they left behind.
And their origins. You mentioned their language was interesting.
Very intriguing. Their language seems closely related to Caucasian languages, which points towards some ancient migrations, maybe from the east or northeast.
So they migrated into the Iranian Plateau.
Yeah, the thinking is they came from areas in the east, maybe around the 3rd millennium BCE, possibly even earlier. They likely entered via Azerbaijan, came down through Talesh and Gilan, and gradually settled in places like Qazvin, Hamadan, Nahavan, Malayr.
And they built Hamadan.
They did. They called it Akse. And they expanded quite a bit, even conquered areas north of Khuzestan, naming a region Kashan.
Okay, skilled artisans, interesting language links.
Mm.
What really makes them stand out culturally? I feel like I've heard something about horses.
Oh, yes. Horses were absolutely central to the Kassites. They weren't just for transport or war. Horses were considered sacred.
Sacred.
Exactly. And we know this because some of the most detailed surviving texts from their culture are instructions on raising and caring for horses. It shows this incredible love and, frankly, devotion to the animal.
Like horse breeding manuals from thousands of years ago?
Pretty much. It reveals this really specialized knowledge they had, a unique cultural focus. You can almost picture them, right? Obsessing over every detail of horse care. It wasn't just practical, it was spiritual, cultural, and that focus on horses definitely influenced later traditions in Iran.
That's incredible. A whole culture where horses are sacred. Okay, moving from skilled artisans and horse lovers.
Yeah.
Let's talk about resilience. The Lulubi, I know there are carvings of them in Kermanshah. They had a rough time, didn't they?
They really did. The Lulubi faced quite a bit of injustice and oppression from the Mesopotamian powers, especially the Babylonians and Assyrians. They were often taken as slaves for long periods.
That sounds brutal.
It was. But they didn't just take it. Historical inscriptions tell us that the Lulubi eventually teamed up with the Guti and the Elamites.
An alliance.
A powerful one. This alliance actually attacked Babylon and managed to get revenge for all the injustices. It shows these groups could organize and fight back effectively. And some research suggests the Lulubi might have been ethnically closer to the Elamites, which could explain that strong alliance.
Wow, talk about turning the tables. But the most striking thing I've heard about the Lulubi, their most famous leader, was a woman, Queen Anubanini.
That's right, Queen Anubanini.
Yeah.
And we have this amazing rock relief of her at Sari Poli Zahab. It's iconic.
What does it show?
It shows a commander standing before the queen. Behind her is the Star of Ishtar, symbolizing divine backing for her victories. Anubanini herself is holding 2 captives on a rope with one hand.
Holding captives.
Yep. And in the other hand, she holds a ring, a symbol of government, of power. Meanwhile, her general has his foot placed on a defeated enemy. It's pure power projection.
A queen depicted in such a powerful, almost martial way that really challenges stereotypes about ancient leadership, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It suggests female leadership wasn't just possible back then. It was recognized, celebrated, maybe even seen as divinely supported. It makes you question how diverse power structures might have been in these societies we often overlook.
That theme of resilience and maybe unexpected power structures, it seems to connect to the Guti as well. You mentioned them in the alliance.
Yes, the Guti. They're fascinating for another reason, too. They were among the earliest groups on the plateau to really shift from purely rural life to establishing urban centers. They settled around Lake Urmia maybe over 6,000 years ago, 4th millennium BCE.
Lake Urmia.
Yeah.
So geographically close to some of these other groups.
Exactly, lots of overlap. But what's truly remarkable about the Guti is their system of government.
How so?
Well, from what we can tell, it seems they had some form of democratic or elected government. The historian Gershman even suggested women had the right to vote and could become leaders, even war leaders or monarchs.
Quit elected government. Women voting in the 3rd or 4th millennium BCE.
It sounds radical, right? But that's what the evidence suggests. It forces us to rethink the standard timeline of democratic ideas. They had 21 kings during their main period of influence, starting around 2200 BCE, but most only reigned for a few years, like 2 to 7 years.
Short reigns. That does suggest some kind of rotation or non-hereditary system, maybe.
It certainly points to something very different from the typical long-reigning absolute monarchs elsewhere, a more experimental approach to leadership, perhaps.
And were they just focused on internal politics, or?
Oh no, they were fighters too. Under a leader named Ilulumash, they actually went to war with both Elam and Sumer, and they won. They occupied Sumer and ruled over it for over a century.
Conquered Sumer.
For over 100 years. Talk about a reversal of fortune. I bet Sumer didn't see that coming.
Wow. So this unique, maybe democratic society was also a major military power for a time.
Absolutely. It shows their system, whatever its specifics, was effective, though their dominance didn't last forever. Their last leader in Sumer was a guy named Turkin, and he only ruled for 40 days before they were pushed out.
Only 40 days. A quick end to that chapter.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've covered Elamites, Kassites, Lulubi, Guti. This is already such a richer picture. Were there other significant groups in this pre-Aryan mix?
Definitely. We shouldn't forget the Manaeans, or Mani. They were settled in West Azerbaijan, south of Lake Urmia. We have artifacts suggesting a pretty developed culture there, too. Then further north, you have the Urartians, a very advanced civilization stretching from Lake Van in modern Turkey all the way over to Lake Urmia in Iran.
Uragians. They sound important.
They were indigenous to that northern region. Again, the name Urartu is what the Assyrians called them. They called themselves the people of the land of Bia.
Bia. And what made them stand out?
Innovation. They actually developed their own unique script. That points to a sophisticated level of administration, maybe literature. They were a major cultural and religious force in the region.
So their own writing system, distinct culture. What happened to them?
Well, like many others, they eventually faced pressure from multiple sides. The Medes, incoming Aryan groups, Scythians, Sumerians. These waves of migration and conflict eventually led to the fall of their civilization. It just shows how dynamic and, frankly, volatile that whole period was.
Constant shifts in power. Okay, one more group you mentioned.
Yeah.
The Caspians. Distinct from the Kassites, you said.
Yes, important distinction. The Caspians. They lived in areas like Talesh, Gilan, East Azerbaijan, parts of Zanjan sort of hugging the Caspian Sea, logically enough. They were also considered quite advanced.
And they had some unique customs. Something about death.
This is probably their most striking feature. Their funerary practices were different. They would take the bodies of their dead out to a designated spot, usually a desert area, far from settlements and farms.
And just leave them there.
Essentially, yes. They'd leave them for vultures and other animals to consume.
Why would they do that?
It was tied to a deep spiritual belief. The Caspians believed that the soul could only remain in the world and be considered blessed and forgiven by the divine if the physical body was consumed by animals.
So if the animals didn't eat the body?
It meant the person wasn't forgiven. It's a really fascinating insight into their worldview, how their beliefs about the afterlife directly shaped these very specific practical customs.
Wow, that's profound. And did these unique beliefs influence anyone else?
Apparently so. These specific Caspian customs seem to have influenced some of the later Aryan groups that came into the region. It shows, again, this wasn't just about conquest. There was real cultural exchange and adoption happening.
So ideas were flowing between these older groups and the newer arrivals. And you mentioned there were probably even more groups, right? Places like Jaraft or Shari Sukte.
Exactly. Those are sites where ongoing archaeology is constantly revealing more about other sophisticated early civilizations in the east and southeast of the plateau. The picture is still evolving.
Okay, so let's try and wrap our heads around this. We've journeyed through Elamites, Kassites, Lulubi, Guti, Manaeans, Urartians, Caspians. It's this incredibly diverse world.
It really is. Advanced cities, unique governments, maybe even democratic ones, powerful queens leading armies, distinct spiritual beliefs about horses or the afterlife. All happening on the Iranian Plateau long before the empires we usually talk about.
So what's the big takeaway here?
I think it just underscores the sheer depth and complexity of human history. It reminds us that it's never just one simple story, one dominant narrative. There were these highly sophisticated societies building things, fighting wars, innovating, creating unique ways of life thousands and thousands of years ago.
It challenges that idea of history starting only with the famous name.
Completely. It shows ingenuity and complex social structures were present much earlier and more widely than we sometimes assume.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? Like, what other hidden histories are still out there, buried under layers of time or maybe just overlooked narratives that could totally shift how we see the past?
That's the exciting part. There's always more to discover, more questions to ask.
Keep exploring, keep learning, and definitely keep asking those deep questions. This has been absolutely fascinating.